The shuttle's descent through Kepler 442b's atmosphere felt like being swallowed by a lavender dream. Adrian Cole pressed his face against the viewport, watching clouds the color of bruised plums streak past, and wondered, not for the first time, if running away to another planet was perhaps the most expensive midlife crisis in human history. Certainly more dramatic than buying a sports car. First time off-world? The passenger beside him asked, a young colonial administrator with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she hadn't yet discovered what the recycled air did to her sinuses after month 3. First time running away off-world, Adrian corrected, then immediately regretted his honesty. The divorce lawyer had advised him to stop oversharing with strangers. Then again, the divorce lawyer had charged him 400 credits for that advice, so perhaps they were even. The shuttle broke through the cloud layer, and Sector 7 verge spread below like something from a fever dream designed by an overly optimistic architect. The houses didn't quite look built so much as grown, organic curves in pale cream and soft green, connected by paths that spiraled rather than marched in straight lines. Trees he couldn't name swayed with bioluminescent leaves that pulsed even in the daylight, and the sky, that impossible purple sky, made everything feel like he'd stumbled into someone else's painting. Beautiful, isn't it? The administrator sighed. Paradise found, they call it in the brochures. Adrian had read those brochures during the 16-month journey in cryosleep. They'd promised peace, purpose, and a fresh start for Earth's tired professionals seeking meaning among the stars. They hadn't mentioned that the planet's rotation was 26 hours long, which meant he'd have to relearn the concept of time itself. Small detail. The shuttle touched down with barely a whisper. E3 engineering, the pilot announced proudly, as if Adrian knew what that meant. He'd been hired to study xenobotany at the local research station, which was ironic considering his actual doctorate was in xenobiology, and he'd spectacularly failed to understand even human biology, particularly the biology of maintaining a functional marriage. Plants seemed safer. Plants didn't ask why you worked late or why you'd forgotten your anniversary 3 years running. Customs was a blur of holographic forms and a cheerful AI that welcomed him to humanity's future while scanning his retinas. His assigned residence was a 15-minute walk through streets that curved like someone had laid them out, using only dreams and perhaps mild intoxication as guides. The afternoon light, he assumed it was afternoon, though his body insisted it was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, painted everything in shades of amber and gold. That's when he noticed the quiet, not peaceful quiet, not the absence of noise, but the presence of something else, attention, maybe, or anticipation. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes the hair on your neck remember evolutionary responses to being watched by predators. Adrian turned slowly, scanning the street. Nothing. Just those beautiful grown houses with their oval windows and garden walls covered in flowering vines that released a scent like vanilla and electricity. But there, movement behind a window. And there, a door closing just a fraction too quickly. And there, was that a face watching from a second-story balcony? He laughed at himself, the sound too loud in the strange stillness. Paranoia, clearly. The cryosleep psychosis warning pamphlet had mentioned this. 16 months frozen, while your consciousness drifted through pharmaceutical dreams, could make anyone jumpy. His house was number 17, marked by a small holographic plate that shimmered his name in rotating script. The door recognized his biosignature and opened with a soft chime that sounded almost apologetic. Inside, the furniture had arranged itself according to the preference profile he'd filled out months ago. Desk by the window, reading chair in the corner, kitchen open to the living space. Everything exactly as requested, which somehow made it feel more alien than if they'd gotten it completely wrong. Adrian dropped his single travel case on the floor and walked to the window. The garden outside was already maintained, which the colonial package had promised. Automated systems, they'd said. He watched a small drone hover past, tending to flowers that looked almost but not quite like roses, if roses had decided to glow softly and hum at a frequency just below hearing. "Well, Adrian," he said to his reflection in the glass, "you wanted different, you certainly got different." A knock at the door made him jump so violently. He nearly knocked over a lamp that looked suspiciously organic. He opened it to find a woman standing on his threshold, and his scientist's brain immediately cataloged the details. While his social brain scrambled for appropriate greeting protocols, he'd definitely forgotten during the cryosleep. She was tall, taller than him by perhaps an inch, with silver hair that fell in a straight cascade past her shoulders. Her face was striking in that way that made you forget the rules of conventional beauty, all sharp angles and elegant proportion. But it was her ears that made him stare, just for a moment too long to be polite. They swept back from her skull in long, graceful points, almost elven in their structure, and he realized with the slow dawning of someone whose brain was still running on Earth time that she wasn't human at all. "Dr. Cole," she said, and her voice had a musical quality that made his name sound more interesting than it had any right to be. "I'm Lyra. I live next door, number 15. I wanted to welcome you to Sector 7 Verd." She held out a covered dish that steamed slightly, smelling of spices he couldn't identify. But that made his stomach remember it hadn't eaten anything that wasn't rehydrated in over a year. "That's thank you," Adrian managed, taking the dish. "That's incredibly kind. I'm Adrian, but you knew that obviously since you just said it, so I'm apparently still mastering the art of basic introduction." Lyra smiled, and something about it made him think of secrets. Not malicious secrets, just the kind of knowing that suggested she found his awkwardness more charming than pathetic, which was already an improvement over his ex-wife's opinion. "How long do you plan to stay?" she asked. It was such an odd question that Adrian laughed. "Well, indefinitely. I mean, I signed a 5-year contract with the research station, but I'm not exactly in a hurry to get back to Earth, so why do you ask?" "Just curious," Lyra said, but her eyes, he noticed they were amber, flecked with gold, held that same watchful quality he'd sensed in the street. "We don't get many humans in this sector. I hope you'll find it comfortable." "I'm sure I will," Adrian said, though he wasn't sure of anything except that this conversation felt like it was about something other than what they were actually saying. Lyra inclined her head in what might have been a bow or simply an elegant nod. He couldn't tell, and turned to leave. Then she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. We're all very interested in making sure you feel welcome." She walked down the path before he could ask what she meant by "we," or why the emphasis on interested made it sound like a research paper rather than neighborly concern. Adrian closed the door and stood in his new house on his new planet, holding a dish of food from his alien neighbor, and tried to remember if the brochures had mentioned anything about sectors populated entirely by women, with extraordinary ears and unnerving smiles. That night, lying in a bed that adjusted itself to his body temperature, and the house's AI playing something it assured him was optimal sleep frequency sound, Adrian stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence of Sector 7 Verd. Except it wasn't quite silent. There were footsteps outside, soft and measured, whispers that might have been wind through those bioluminescent trees or might have been voices too careful to be overheard. And once he could have sworn he heard someone laugh, musical and strange, followed by a shushing sound. He turned on his side and told himself it was just culture shock, just adjustment, just the normal paranoia of being 43 million miles from everything he'd ever known. But as he finally drifted toward sleep, Adrian couldn't shake the certainty that if he looked out his window right now, he'd see them. All of them, his new neighbors, standing in their gardens and on their balconies and in their doorways, watching his house with patient, curious eyes, waiting for something he didn't yet understand. Welcome to paradise, he thought. Population, you and everyone who's apparently very interested in what you'll do next. Adrian discovered the cameras on his third morning when he knocked over a potted plant, while doing what he generously called exercise, and what his physical therapist would have called flailing. The pot shattered. Apparently even alien ceramics obeyed basic physics, and he spent 20 minutes sweeping up soil and apologizing to the plant itself, which seemed excessive even for him. By evening, a replacement pot sat on his doorstep. Same size, same soft blue glaze, even the same small chip on the rim that he'd assumed was a manufacturing defect. He stood in his doorway, holding the pot, and felt the first real prickle of something beyond jet lag and cultural adjustment. Someone had been watching. Someone had noticed. Someone had replicated a detail so minor he'd barely registered it himself. "Okay," he said to the empty street. "That's either incredibly thoughtful or incredibly creepy, and I haven't decided which." The research station provided a welcome distraction from his growing unease. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the head of xenobotany, greeted him with the weary enthusiasm of someone who'd been doing everyone's job for 6 months while waiting for her new hire to arrive. "Thank God you're real," she said, pumping his hand. "I was starting to think you were an administrative fantasy. Do you know anything about phosphorescent symbiosis in root systems?" "Absolutely nothing," Adrian admitted. "Perfect. You'll figure it out. Lab 3 is yours. Try not to let anything eat you." The work was absorbing enough that Adrian could almost forget about Sector 7 Verd's peculiarities. Almost. But during his lunch break on day 4, he noticed something odd about his meal. The sandwich he'd packed that morning had been turkey and cheese. The sandwich in his lunch container was now turkey, cheese, and tomato, exactly how he preferred it but had been too lazy to prepare. He stared at it for a long moment, then took a bite. Delicious. Possibly the best sandwich he'd ever eaten, which only made it more disturbing. "Someone broke into my lunch," he told Yuki. She looked up from her microscope. "What?" "My lunch. Someone improved it between this morning and now." Yuki blinked. Did you report it to security?" "And say what?" "Help, someone added tomatoes to my sandwich with suspicious competence." She returned to her microscope, muttering something about cryosleep affecting people differently. The garden situation revealed itself over the following week. Adrian had never been particularly skilled at horticulture. His ex-wife had once said his thumbs weren't just not green, they were actively hostile to plant life. Yet the small plot outside his house flourished with aggressive perfection. Flowers bloomed in coordinated colors. Weeds vanished overnight. The grass maintained itself at exactly 2 inches, which he knew because he'd measured it out of sheer disbelief. On day 9, he decided to test a theory. He deliberately left a section of the garden messy, scattered leaves, an overturned garden ornament, a patch of scraggly grass. Then he went inside and watched through his window. Lyra appeared within the hour, as if summoned by the disturbance in the force of neighborhood aesthetics. But she wasn't alone. 3 other women accompanied her, all sharing those distinctive elongated ears and that same quality of focused attention. They moved through his garden with practiced efficiency, restoring order with the kind of coordination that suggested either excellent teamwork or low-level telepathy. Adrian opened his door. "Hi, hello. That's my garden you're fixing without permission." All 4 women froze in perfect synchronization, which was somehow more unnerving than if they'd scattered. Lyra straightened, holding a rake that definitely hadn't been in his garden before. "Adrian, we were just maintaining my property without asking," he suggested, "because I'm starting to notice a pattern here. The pot, the sandwich, the mysteriously perfect lawn. Are you all moonlighting as a cleaning service, or is there something else going on?" The other 3 women looked at Lyra, who set down the rake with careful precision. "We want you to be comfortable. That's what you said when I arrived. But comfortable people generally get to maintain their own gardens, even badly. So what's really happening here?" One of the other women stepped forward, shorter than Lyra, with dark copper hair and eyes that reminded Adrian of cats evaluating whether something was prey or furniture. "I'm Sira. I live at number 19. We're conducting observations." "Observations," Adrian repeated. Social behavioral observations, another woman added helpfully. She had pale blonde hair and wore what looked like casual clothes but somehow seemed formal. I'm Naya, number 23. We've been watching how you adapt, the fourth woman said. Her hair was deep black with a silver streak. Routines, preferences, stress responses. I'm Kira, number 12. Adrian looked between them. These four alien women standing in his garden holding various implements of landscaping, calmly explaining that they'd been studying him like he was some kind of science fair project. The absurdity hit him all at once and he started laughing, great gasping laughs that made his sides hurt. I'm sorry, he managed. It's just, I came here to study plants. Turns out I'm the plant. What's next? Are you going to water me? Check my pH levels. Lyra's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. Your hydration is concerning. You drink only coffee. Oh my God, you're tracking my coffee consumption. We're tracking everything, Sira said matter-of-factly. It's important data. Adrian sat down on his doorstep because standing seemed suddenly complicated. Why? Why me specifically? There are other humans in the colony. I saw at least 5 at the research station. The women exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them that Adrian couldn't begin to interpret. You're in our sector, Lyra said finally. That makes you our responsibility. Your responsibility to surveil. To understand, Naya corrected, there's a difference. Is there? Adrian rubbed his face. Look, I appreciate that you're trying to be helpful. The sandwich was great, honestly, but this is weird. You understand that this is weird, right? We understand that our approach may seem unusual from your cultural perspective, Kira said, with the careful tone of someone who'd rehearsed that exact phrase. That's corporate speak for yes. We know it's weird, but we're doing it anyway. Lyra crouched down to his eye level, her amber eyes serious. We're not trying to make you uncomfortable, Adrian. We're trying to learn. Your species and ours don't interact often. When we do, we want to do it right. There was something genuine in her voice that cut through his irritation. Adrian sighed. Okay, I get that. Cross-cultural exchange is important. But maybe, and this is just a suggestion, you could ask me questions instead of sorting through my garbage. All 4 women had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. You know about the garbage, Adrian said weakly. You throw away too much plastic, Sira said. We have better recycling systems you should use. The point is, Adrian said firmly, from now on observation with permission only. Deal. Lyra extended her hand, and when he shook it, her skin was warm and her grip surprisingly strong. Deal. Though you should know we've already compiled significant data. Fantastic. Do I get to see this data? That would compromise the study's integrity. Of course it would. Adrian stood, brushing off his pants. One question. Am I the only human you're studying, or is this happening to everyone in the colony? The women exchanged those looks again, and Adrian felt a chill despite the warm purple twilight settling over the sector. Just you, Lyra said softly. For now. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep despite the house AI's best efforts with its optimal frequencies. He kept thinking about those words, for now, as if he were some kind of test case. A prototype interaction to be analyzed before rolling out broader human-ethery relations. He got up, poured himself water instead of coffee, small victories, and stood at his window. Sure enough, there were lights on in nearly every house he could see. Silhouettes moved behind curtains. Shadows crossed gardens. His data pad chimed with a message from Lyra. We really are trying to help. Sometimes helping looks like watching. Sorry if that's strange. Your species watches each other too, you just call it social media. Despite himself, Adrian smiled. She had a point. He typed back, fair, but at least on social media I chose to post the content. You're screenshotting my whole life without asking. 3 dots appeared then. Would you post your life if we asked? Adrian stared at the message for a long time. Would he? After spending months running away from Earth, from his failures, from everyone who knew the man he'd been before, Would he willingly share himself with these strange, attentive neighbors who seemed genuinely curious about who he was? "Maybe," he typed, "if you tell me what you're really looking for." The dots appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, "Someone worth knowing, that's all. Sleep well, Adrian." He stood at the window until the lights in the neighboring houses began to dim, one by one, like stars going out. Somewhere in the distance, he heard that musical laughter again, and this time it didn't sound quite so alien. Just lonely, perhaps, just hoping, just watching and waiting to see if he might watch back. The community center looked like someone had asked an architect to design a building while under the influence of pleasant hallucinations. Adrian stood outside it, clutching an invitation that had appeared on his doorstep that morning. Actual paper, cream-colored and slightly textured, with his name written in flowing script that seemed to shimmer when he tilted it. "You have been cordially invited to address the Sector 7 Verd Council regarding matters of mutual significance," it read. Below that, in smaller text, "Refreshments will be provided. Please don't be alarmed." That last line was what convinced him to come. Anyone who felt the need to preemptively tell you not to be alarmed was either deeply considerate or deeply concerning, and Adrian had already invested too much in this bizarre situation to back out now. Lyra met him at the entrance, wearing what he'd come to recognize as formal attire for the Ethery, a long tunic in deep green with silver threading that caught the light. Her ears seemed even more prominent today, adorned with small silver cuffs that traced their elegant curves. "Thank you for coming," she said, and he could hear genuine relief in her voice. "Did I have a choice?" "Always, we just hoped you'd be curious." "Curiosity is what got me into xenobiology in the first place," Adrian said. "Also what ended my marriage, according to my ex-wife. So let's see what kind of disaster it leads to this time." Lyra's lips quirked. "Your ability to use humor as a defensive mechanism is noted in your file." "I have a file. Of course I have a file. Is it a thick file?" "Respectably sized." The interior of the community center defied several laws of physics that Adrian had previously considered non-negotiable. The space seemed larger inside than outside, with a domed ceiling that displayed what looked like a real-time feed of the cosmos. Stars wheeling in their ancient dance, nebulae blooming in impossible colors. Seated in a semicircle were 7 women, all ethery, all watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to what might have been anxiety. He recognized Sira, Nea, and Kira from his garden intervention. The others were new, but they shared that same quality of intense focus that made Adrian feel like a specimen under very polite microscopes. "Dr. Adrian Cole," the woman at the center said, rising. She was older than the others, or at least gave that impression, though Adrian had no idea how ethery aged. Silver threaded through her dark hair, and her ears bore more elaborate decorations. "I am eldest Myra. Thank you for accepting our invitation." "Thanks for the advanced warning about not being alarmed," Adrian said. "Really set a calm tone." Several of the council members smiled, which made them seem suddenly less intimidating and more like people trying very hard not to laugh at an inside joke. "Please sit." Myra gestured to a chair that actually materialized, in front of the semicircle. Adrian sat, partly because his knees had stopped being reliable the moment furniture started appearing from thin air. "So," he said, "I'm guessing this isn't about my overdue library books." "We don't have libraries," Nea said helpfully. "All information is digitally accessible through neural interfaces." "Lucky you. I still have to read things like an animal." Myra folded her hands, and her expression shifted to something more serious. "Adrian, what do you know about the Ethery?" "Honestly, not much. The colony briefings covered about 30 different species, and I mostly focused on the plants. I know you're technologically advanced, clearly, and you've been involved in the terraforming consortium. Beyond that," he shrugged, "I know you all seem to live in this sector. You make excellent sandwiches, and you're weirdly invested in my garbage sorting habits." We are 90% female, Sierra said bluntly. Have been for 4 centuries. Adrian blinked. How does that work biologically? It doesn't particularly well, Kira said. We're dying out, slowly but definitively. The levity drained from the room, like someone had pulled a plug. Adrian leaned forward, his scientist's mind engaging despite his general policy of avoiding serious conversations. Genetic bottleneck. A plague, Myra said, 417 years ago. It targeted specific chromosomal expressions. The male population dropped to 3% in a single generation. We've been trying to recover ever since, but the mathematics are unforgiving. I'm sorry, Adrian said and meant it. I can't imagine. We've adapted, Lyra said quietly. We've built a society that functions. We've maintained our culture, our technology, our art. But we're a society living in a very long, very slow goodbye. Adrian rubbed his face, processing. Okay, but what does this have to do with me? I'm not a geneticist. I study plants that glow in the dark. You study life, Myra corrected, and you're adaptable. We've been watching you for 3 weeks, Adrian. Not just your routines or preferences, but how you think. How you respond to stress, to confusion, to change. How you use humor to diffuse tension and maintain optimism despite personal setbacks. You know about the divorce. We know everything, Sierra said, not unkindly. Your psychological profile suggests high empathy, cognitive flexibility, and resilience in the face of cultural dissonance. That's a fancy way of saying I roll with weird situations. Precisely, Myra said, which is why we chose you. The room felt suddenly smaller. Adrian stood, needing to move. Chose me for what exactly? The 7 council members exchanged glances, that silent communication happening again. Finally, Lyra spoke. We're not just studying humans, Adrian. We're studying you specifically because we're trying to determine whether your species can be trusted. Trusted with what? With us, Myra said simply. With an alliance unlike anything either of our species has attempted. We have technology that could help Earth, environmental restoration systems, medical advances, transportation networks that could connect your scattered colonies. You have genetic diversity we desperately need, cultural perspectives we've lost, and a population young enough to think in centuries rather than decades. Adrian felt his pulse hammering. You're talking about integration. Actual, large-scale integration between humans and Aethery. Eventually, perhaps, Kira said. But first, we need to know if it's even possible. If our species can coexist, cooperate, maybe even, she hesitated. Interbreed, Adrian said, and was gratified when several council members looked uncomfortable. At least he wasn't the only one finding this conversation surreal. That's far in the future, if ever, Myra said firmly. Right now, we need to understand human psychology, particularly how humans react to Aethery social structures. You're our test case, Adrian. Your success or failure here determines whether we approach Earth officially or whether we remain separate species, sharing space but never truly connecting. No pressure then, Adrian said weakly. He walked to the edge of the room, staring up at the projected cosmos. So when you ask me how long I'm planning to stay, you're really asking whether I'm going to run screaming back to Earth and tell everyone that aliens are studying us like lab rats. Essentially, Lyra admitted. And the observation, the helpfulness, the general invasion of my privacy, that's all been you trying to figure out if humans and Aethery can actually be neighbors without one side getting weirded out and calling the galactic HOA. We don't have, Nea started. It's a joke, Adrian said. I'm processing through humor again. It's in my file, apparently. He turned back to face them. These 7 women who represented an entire dying civilization, and felt the weight of something enormous settling onto his shoulders. Not just his own future, but potentially the future of 2 species. Here's the thing, he said slowly. I came here running away from failure. From a career that went nowhere, from a marriage that fell apart, from feeling like I didn't matter on Earth. And now you're telling me I matter so much, that I'm basically humanity's unintentional ambassador to an alien species desperate enough to pin their hopes on one divorced botanist who can't even keep a cactus alive. You kept the Sansara plant in your lab alive, Sira pointed out. Yuki was impressed. That's because I talked to it, which is apparently my coping mechanism for loneliness. And now you all know that because you've been watching me. And honestly, this is the weirdest therapy session I've ever had. Myra smiled, and it transformed her face from austere to almost warm. We're not asking you to represent humanity, Adrian. We're asking you to be yourself and let us learn from that. You've already taught us that humans use humor to process fear, that they're capable of kindness even when confused, and that they'll accept tomatoes in their sandwich as long as it's done well. Despite everything, Adrian laughed. That's your big takeaway, sandwich modification tolerance. It's more significant than you think, Lyra said seriously. It shows adaptability, openness to improvement, willingness to accept help even from unexpected sources. Adrian looked at each of them in turn. These alien women with their elegant ears and their impossible burden, their hope and their careful observation. He thought about Earth, about the messages he'd been ignoring from his ex-wife's lawyer, about the research station and Yuki's exhausted enthusiasm, about his garden that stayed perfect because people cared enough to maintain it. I need time, he said finally, to think about this, to figure out what it means. Of course, Myra said, take all the time you need. We've waited 4 centuries. We can wait a bit longer. But, Lyra added, standing, while you're thinking maybe you could stop by for dinner sometime, just as neighbors, no observation, no data collection, just people sharing food. People, Adrian repeated. People, she confirmed. He nodded slowly, then headed for the door. As he reached it, he turned back. For what it's worth, I think you're putting way too much faith in someone who still can't figure out the recycling system. We'll teach you, Sira called out. We're very patient. Outside, the purple sky was darkening toward twilight, and the bioluminescent trees were beginning their evening glow. Adrian walked home through streets that felt less alien now, past houses where lights flickered on and people lived their lives, waiting and hoping and watching. Somewhere in the cosmos above, Earth spun on, completely unaware that its future might rest on whether one man could learn to be a good neighbor. No pressure at all. Adrian spent 3 days doing what he did best when faced with monumental decisions, obsessively researching things that didn't actually help. He read every file on E3 culture the colony database contained, learned that their plague had originated from a well-intentioned genetic modification gone catastrophically wrong, and discovered that their word for hope translated roughly to, the place where light hasn't died yet. That last part kept him awake at night. On the 4th day, he found Lyra sitting in his garden, not maintaining it, not observing, just sitting on the bench he'd never actually used, looking up at the purple sky with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hey, he said, stepping outside with 2 cups of coffee. I'm trying this radical new thing where I offer beverages instead of accusing people of surveillance. She accepted the cup with a smile that seemed tired around the edges. Personal growth, that'll be good for your file. I thought we were done with the file. We are, old habits. She patted the bench and Adrian sat beside her, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun, this planet's sun, binary stars that created those impossible purple sunsets on his face. I've been thinking, he said. I assumed. You've been avoiding everyone for days. Even Yuki sent a message asking if you'd been absorbed by a plant. Did she really? No, but she did ask if you were okay. You missed 2 days at the lab. Adrian took a sip of coffee. I needed to process. Turns out discovering you're accidentally responsible for interspecies relations requires some mental adjustment. You're not responsible for anything, Lyra said quietly. That's the point. We're just asking you to live your life and let us learn from it. No pressure, no obligation. Except there is pressure, isn't there? Because if I fail, If I can't adapt or if I reject you all, then you pack up your experiment and conclude humans aren't worth the effort. Two species that could help each other just stay in their separate corners of the galaxy, and your people keep fading while mine stay isolated and stupid. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, that musical sound he'd heard his first night, but up close it was warmer, more genuine. You really do process through catastrophizing, don't you? It's in my file. Adrian. She turned to face him, her amber eyes serious. We're not going to pack up and leave if you can't be perfect. We're already learning from you. We've learned that humans need personal space but crave connection. That they value honesty even when it's uncomfortable. That they'll joke about their own failures as a way of owning them rather than hiding from them. You've taught us more in 3 weeks than we learned in 3 years of reading human cultural databases. But I called you all creepy for watching me. You were right too, we needed to hear that. She set down her coffee cup. We've been so focused on survival, on data and observation, that we forgot how to just be neighbors. You reminded us. Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not an alien conducting experiments but a person carrying the weight of her civilization's slow extinction, trying desperately to find a path forward that didn't end in silence. Okay, he said, okay. Okay, let's try. Not the big integration thing, not yet, but the dinner thing. The being neighbors thing. I'll live my life, you all can ask me questions instead of sorting my garbage, and we'll see what happens. No promises about saving civilization, but I can probably manage friendly. Lyra's face transformed with relief and something that looked like joy. Really? Really, but I have conditions. Of course you do. But first I get to ask questions too. About E3 culture, history, what it's like knowing your species is ending. Fair exchange. Agreed. Second, someone teaches me how to actually maintain that garden. I want to learn, even if I'm terrible at it. Sierra will be thrilled. She's been wanting to teach you proper soil composition for weeks. Third, Adrian hesitated, then pushed forward. You stop treating me like I'm special. I'm not humanity's best representative. I'm just a guy who ran away from his problems and accidentally landed in the middle of yours. If this works, if humans and E3 can actually connect, it should be because we're all just people trying to figure out how to live together, not because I'm some magical test case. Lyra reached over and took his hand, her skin warm, her grip steady. You're not magical, Adrian, you're just willing to try. That's rarer than you think. The following weeks fell into a rhythm that felt less like observation and more like actual life. Adrian learned that E3 cooking involved ingredients that glowed faintly and singing to encourage proper fermentation. He was terrible at both, but enjoyed trying. He taught Sierra about earth plants and discovered she had a wicked sense of humor about his former inability to grow anything. Nea showed him how to use the Ansible network to send messages across light years in real time, and he sent his first communication to Earth in months, not to his ex-wife's lawyer, but to his sister, who'd been worried. Kira turned out to be a musician, and her instrument looked like a harp designed by someone from another dimension. She played for him one evening, and the music made him understand why the E3 called hope, the place where light hasn't died. It sounded exactly like that, like defiance and beauty existing in the same breath. The sector council met monthly in the community center, and Adrian started attending, not as a test subject, but as a resident with opinions about everything from street maintenance to the bioluminescent trees that apparently needed pruning. He argued with Myra about resource allocation with the same energy he'd once used to argue with peer reviewers, and discovered that the eldest had a devastating wit when she chose to deploy it. His garden became something of a communal project. Sierra taught him about native plants, while Kira added decorative elements that glowed in patterns. Nea installed a small fountain that recycled water through what she called quantum filtration, which Adrian suspected was either brilliant science or complete nonsense. He was still learning which. Lyra just sat on the bench and offered commentary. usually along the lines of maybe don't plant that there unless you wanted to eat the neighbors. At the research station, Yuki noticed the change in him. You seem less like someone running away, she observed one afternoon while they examined a particularly aggressive vine specimen. Maybe I'm running toward something instead, Adrian said, then immediately felt embarrassed by how sincere that sounded. Good, whatever it is, keep doing it. You're better at your job when you're not radiating existential crisis. The real turning point came 3 months after the council meeting. Adrian organized what he called a cultural exchange potluck, and what Sierra called Adrian's excuse to teach us about human food and see if we survive it. Humans from across the colony came to Sector 7 Verd, wary at first but curious. The Ethery welcomed them with that same intense focus they'd once directed solely at Adrian, but tempered now with the lessons they'd learned. Ask before helping, respect boundaries, and always warn people before food starts glowing. Adrian stood in the community center, watching humans and Ethery share food and stories, laughing at miscommunications and finding unexpected common ground. A human engineer and Ethery architect were deep in conversation about impossible buildings. A human teacher and Ethery historian were comparing childhood stories, discovering surprising parallels. Someone had started playing music, human guitar and Ethery harp together, creating something neither species had made alone. Lyra appeared beside him, holding what looked like wine but probably involved quantum fermentation or whatever. You did this. We did this, Adrian corrected. I just suggested tacos. The tacos were controversial. But everything good is controversial. He accepted the glass she offered. Is this going to make me see colors that don't exist? Only pleasantly. She clinked her glass against his. To neighbors. To people, Adrian said. Just people figuring it out. Later, after everyone had left and the purple sky had darkened to indigo scattered with unfamiliar stars, Adrian sat in his garden with Lyra, Sierra, Nea, and Kira. They'd become his friends, not research subjects or alien neighbors, just people he genuinely enjoyed spending time with. So, Sierra said, sprawled on the grass with complete disregard for dignity. Do you think it worked? The integration experiment. We're not calling it that anymore, Lyra said firmly. Adrian hates it. I don't hate it. I just think trying not to be alone in the universe is more accurate. Less scientific, Nea pointed out. More honest, Adrian countered. Kira plucked a soft chord on her instrument. Does it matter what we call it? We're here, we're talking. The light hasn't died. Adrian looked up at the stars. So many stars, and somewhere among them Earth. His old life. His failures and regrets and the person he'd been when he thought running away was the same as starting over. He'd left Earth trying to escape being seen, and ended up on a planet where people watched him constantly, and somehow that had taught him how to be visible again. How to be present. How to matter in the small, important ways that don't make history but make life worth living. I'm staying, he said suddenly. Past the 5-year contract. I'm staying here, if that's okay. Lyra smiled and the starlight caught in her eyes. We were hoping you would. Someone needs to maintain this garden, Sierra added. And you're still terrible at it. Also, we've gotten used to your coffee, Nea said. Ours is too efficient. Yours has character. Character is code for mediocre. Exactly. They sat together as the night deepened, and the bioluminescent trees began their slow pulse of light. Blue and green in colors Adrian was learning the names for in a language that wasn't his own but was becoming familiar. Two species, different and alike, learning to share space and hope and the revolutionary act of being neighbors. Somewhere in the cosmos, civilizations rose and fell. Species evolved and went extinct. The universe continued its ancient indifference. But here, on a small terraformed world with a purple sky, people were laughing together and the light hadn't died yet. It wouldn't die. Not tonight. Maybe not ever if they kept trying. Adrian leaned back on his hands and thought about messages he'd send to Earth. Not reports or data. just stories about his friends and his garden and his accidentally revolutionary act of staying. His sister would laugh. His ex-wife would probably say he'd finally found something he couldn't quit. She'd be right. "Hey," he said to his friends, his strange, wonderful, patient friends. "Thanks for watching me, for caring enough to learn." "Thanks for teaching," Lyra said softly, "for being worth knowing." Above them the stars wheeled in their dance, and below in the houses of Sector 7 Verd, lights glowed warm. People lived their lives, human and ethery, separate and together, writing a future neither species had imagined but both were beginning to believe in. One garden, one neighbor, one small act of staying at a time.